Ever notice how nobody ever wants to talk about their finances? Well, this show is here to change that by having real, honest, frank conversations about the financial side of life. Think of it kind of like a conversation between friends, just if your friends were really good at giving financial advice. This is Real Talk with Atlantic Credit Unions. I'm your host, Mel Henniger, and today's topic is student debt. Student debt isn't uncommon in Atlantic Canada. In fact, we carry some of the highest student debt rates in all of the country. The average cost for university tuition in Canada is around $6,500 a year. According to Statistics Canada, that means the average university student graduates with over $36,000 in debt. Student debt can feel really overwhelming, and financial literacy isn't always taught in school. Managing your debt and working to pay it off once you've graduated can be a struggle. Joining me today to talk about that is Casey Spears. Casey graduated with over $55,000 in student debt and has learned a few things along the way about paying it back. Joining me from Credit Unions is Elaine Robertson. She works at East Coast Credit Union as the manager of the Member Advice Center. Welcome, Casey and Elaine.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
So Casey, why don't you start off by just telling us a little bit about your situation?
Yeah, so I received my undergrad, and that was a 4-year program, and then I did a 1-year additional diploma program. So that was 5 years of school, and towards the end I had around $55,000 in debt. I was able to have the 6-month grace period that is offered from the government. And then kind of once that 6 months was up, real life hit me, and I had to start paying it back. Yeah. I was fortunate in the beginning because I was living at home and still working, so my expenses were minimal. But then once I transitioned to a different job and I moved to Halifax, things got a bit tighter in my budget, and my student loans were kind of one of the last things I really paid attention to because I felt it's always going to be there. Mm-hmm. It's going to take a lifetime, it feels, to pay back. And so I kind of started to forget about it a little bit. I have a provincial and a federal student loan. And so my provincial student loan was roughly around $200 a month. And then my Nova Scotian one is $75 a month. So then I just kind of forgot about them.
Right. So, I think when you graduate, I think you always kind of know that you have to pay off those student loans, but I think when real life actually hits and that grace period ends, it's a bit of a challenge. So, Elaine, is that something that you see often with other members who come in, just sort of struggling with the reality that, school's out, it's time to pay back the loans?
Absolutely, and it kind of slaps people in the face because it comes kind of as a surprise. In those 6 months, the first 6-month grace period goes by like that, right? Yeah. And all of a sudden your cash flow is being eaten up by these big debt payments, mm-hmm. and it's a scary thing. Unfortunately, at that age too, in our young 20s, our priorities are a little bit different, and we're not thinking so much about the implications of not making those payments. And missing a payment or even being late on a payment has big long-term implications on your credit bureau and your ability to borrow in the future. So if that's not something that you understand or not something that you're taught in school before you begin your repayment, mm-hmm. Then it starts a lot of people off on the wrong foot. And it's a tough way to start, your new career in this new stage of your life. My mother used to make a joke. When I came out of university, I used to have to borrow money from mom to kind of help make ends meet, and mm-hmm. she said, Elaine, when I started off with zero. I had nothing, and I had to start off on my own, right? I said, wouldn't that be nice? Exactly. We were starting off at negative $55,000. Yes. That's a tough way to start out. So it's not uncommon. It's certainly something that's very much a reality for the majority of Nova Scotians.
Yeah. And so, Casey, I know you mentioned that you graduated and you were making those payments, but can you tell me about what happened when those payments increased and what happened then?
Yeah, so I knew that I would obviously have to pay back my student loans at some point when I graduated, but what I didn't quite understand was that when the government determines what my minimum monthly payment is, that they look at just my what my income is before taxes even. They don't take into account my living expenses or anything else like that. Mm-hmm. So when I started my new job, they looked at my salary and they said, whoa, you can afford the additional money, so $400 a month. And I was like, I cannot, and I will not. So I didn't. And then I guess they thought, well, we'll up it to $1,000 a month, which
Wow.
I certainly could not do that either. So eventually they sent me to collection, and collection was calling me every now and then. And I would still make my Nova Scotian payments, but I was not doing my federal loans. And eventually, the accountant at where I work, he gave me a call and he said, well, Casey, I have this letter from the government, and legally I have to do what they say. They're gonna dock your wages. And so I thought, oh no, now I actually I must take action. It was about probably a year and a half where I kind of just lived a very naive life and I just didn't think about them.
Right.
But that was kind of the wake-up call. That was the big uh-oh.
Yeah, so walk me through that decision a little bit. You know, the government is knocking on your door asking for money, and you know, did you realize that there would be consequences to that decision, or did you just think that it would kind of go away because, you know, there's other bigger debts to chase after, or?
Yeah, I guess I kind of thought that I would eventually have a little more self-control and stick to my budget much more tightly, but the final straw was when they came for my paycheck, and I thought, well, this isn't going to work. So I made a few adjustments in my life. I got rid of my car, and that took care of insurance, and just kind of started to not maybe eat out as much or do some fun things on the weekends.
We're back on the fun times.
Yeah, exactly. I kind of just start to grow up a bit.
Yeah, and so Elena, you know, again, is this something that you see a lot of, you know, trying to help members sort of set a budget?
Absolutely.
You know, be realistic about some of those lifestyle choices and things like that?
And Casey, you use the word budget, and that's not something that we hear people your age talking about. A lot of people don't even know what a budget is, how to make a budget, how to manage a budget, and those that do make a budget, it still can be tight. You know, there's still room in your budget where you need to free up cash flow. In your case, you made some really big sacrifices so that you could focus on your student loan repayment. However, that's not the most important thing that's happening in your life at that time of your life either, right? So it's tough. One thing that young people don't understand or may not consider is that working with repayment assistance through the CRA, it can be a really easy process, picking up the phone and having a conversation, right? Renegotiating the terms of that loan. One strategy I always suggest is to negotiate the terms of your loan and set it over the longest amortization period. And that doesn't sound like good financial advice because you're paying interest for a longer period and you're paying off that balance a lot longer, so you could end up paying a lot more in interest. But what it does is it sets your payments nice and low, which means that you can change your payments, you can increase your payments throughout the term of that, but if your circumstances change during that term, then you can still go back down to that minimum payment. Right. So that will help you free up cash flow if you're doing some budgeting. So if you set your student loan to be paid off over 10 years at that minimum payment, you can make an agreement to increase those payments to what's reasonable within your budget. Yes. And anything that goes above and beyond that minimum payment will go straight to your principal, which means that you're paying it off a little bit quicker. Circumstances change, you need to buy a car, you have a baby, you get married, whatever those circumstances are, you can then go back down to that minimum payment. So it just allows a little bit of wiggle room and a little bit of flexibility. Yes. But yeah, making the right priority, the calls to make the right priority when you're doing your budget is tough, and so shrinking what you're paying in entertainment. In your case, that's what you've done. Got rid of your car, so you prioritize what's most important. And unfortunately, debt repayment has to be a priority because it's going to follow you throughout the rest of your life. So when you're ready to buy your first home or buy another car, you know, the history of your repayment is a reflection on what your future payments are going to look like. So that's something that a lot of people coming out of university don't realize, and they don't recognize that there are some serious consequences. But making those arrangements with the government at the time that discussion's being had and at the time you're renegotiating, they also offer repayment assistance program, which we can take advantage of every 6 months for 10 full years. And so what they do is they assess your financial situation, and again, it is based on your income, and they give you what that minimum payment would look like, and then they will pay the interest and the principal above and beyond that minimum payment based on your personal income. So that's really helpful, but you don't get re-enrolled every 6 months, so it's something that you have to manage.
You have to actively do it.
Yeah, you have to reapply every 6 months. But there are some programs that are available to assist with that.
And you mentioned how easy it is to kind of just pick up the phone and call them, and that's actually kind of how I fixed my situation. I was able to call them and explain that although on paper it says I make this much, I walked them through my monthly expenses, and they were very understanding, and they decreased it to a very reasonable amount. And they said, we'll reevaluate in 6 months. And so the 6 months is coming up, so I'll give them a call again and explain the situation, and we'll just continue on that way. So I am at least making the payments now.
Yeah, so I'm curious, you mentioned that making and sticking to a budget was sort of a big part of your strategy to get real about paying back your loans. What was that like? Was that challenging, and how did you kind of go about doing that?
Yes, it was very stressful because it's very rare that you actually put down all your numbers on one piece of paper and see it all, and you have all your expenses, and then you just have your one thing in the income column.
Right. It doesn't seem like it's a nice balance.
No, exactly. But my mom is an accountant, and so she helped me with it, and we just kind of walked through it, and she was very honest with me, and she just said, this is the reality of this. You're a young person, so you have to kind of figure out what's worth spending money on and what's not, and my student loans is at the top of the list now instead of the bottom.
And so do you find it hard, when, your friends are calling and, oh, let's go do this thing, or, have you had to sacrifice much in terms of your lifestyle?
No, not a lot, and they are all very understanding because they're also paying off
Probably
their
in a
debt.
similar situation.
Yeah, exactly. They're hopefully a little better than I am, but no, it was really just kind of rearranging, like instead of seeing someone and going out and doing something, maybe we just have a movie night in or whatever it might be. So we were able to make those changes, and I'm not suffering because of it.
Yeah, that's good. And so, Elaine, what's your general advice when thinking about making a budget and sticking to it? It's easy. It's so easy to write that budget down, but the tips to actually stick to it and be disciplined in that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that writing it down is the first step. You can do that, and then you can forget about it for a month, right? So using the tools that are available to you to help you stick to it. For example, setting up automatic payments for all of your absolute requirements to come out on the day that your paycheck goes in, right?
Yes.
That's something that you can set up using your online banking with your credit union's app or just on the website. So basically on the day your direct deposit goes in, you can set up all of those payments to come out. What's left over is sort of the more variable expenses that you can kind of play with a little bit differently throughout the month. And understanding the difference between fixed payments and variable payments or fixed budget items and variable budget items, right? To help understand that if there's a little bit of money left over on your budget, because of the variable items, to carry that over into the next month, maybe into a savings plan. And that's another piece too, is when you are budgeting, never neglect to budget a little bit to go towards your savings. Your circumstances are going to change, and it seems silly to think that you're dealing with such small cash flow. How are you going to focus on saving? But there's going to be times in your life when you might need access to emergency funds, right? A lot of financial experts recommend having 3 months' income available to you in a savings account. That might be a little bit unrealistic in our 20s and in our 30s.
That's a significant chunk of money.
It
when
is.
You don't have that much left over anyway.
Absolutely,
right?
yeah. But if you commit in your budget to setting up an automatic transfer from your checking account to your savings account, so you can see that balance grow, and employ some strategies like putting a hold on those savings, or not allowing withdrawals to come from that saving, or once a year locking in that savings account balance so that you can access it and earning a little bit more interest in it. Those are some strategies that can kind of help you make sure you're not touching your savings. And then when you're ready to buy your home or buy a condo, then you have a little bit of a balance that you can access for a down payment. So it's also helping you think about your future financial goals.
That's what I need to think of.
Yeah. And there is a helpful resource on honestmoney.ca for a first-timers budgeting guide as well. You can always check that out if you need more information. That's all the time that we have for today. So thank you for joining us. This has been Real Talk with Atlantic Credit Unions, and I've been joined today by my guests, Casey and Elaine. We'll see you next time.
Thank you.